honored to have Dee Ann Turner with us today. Dee Ann and I were like ships passing in the night at Chick-fil-A so many years ago, and I didn't have the pleasure of working directly with her, but I am so honored to have her as our guest today. Dee Ann is an author, a speaker. She's dedicated her entire work life to helping us figure out how to have better culture in our organizations, better talent acquisition, how to sustain that talent, and she's really worked her whole life, I'll call it, because I don't think you could have worked too much before you got to Chick-fil-A, as you spent 3 decades at Chick-fil-A. We have many of the common friends. One of the things that you were able to do is be the first female officer at Chick-fil-A, which again was extremely important in those early days. And I'm going to come back to that. That might even be my first question, how that came about. And Dee Ann is currently fostering extraordinary talent, building competitive cultures while helping others build extraordinary careers. And your newest book certainly gets into crushing your career, and we're going to come to that later. And you're the talent acquisition expert in residence at High Point University. I believe this to be correct. I didn't verify this, so I apologize. Your husband, Ashley, and you have 3 adult sons now.
Correct.
And as CEO Zones, our audience is CEOs and owners of businesses, and we're honored to have you as a Founders Club member. Back when we were just formalizing on a napkin what was CEO Zones going to be, you emailed me and said, "We don't know what you're up to, Bill, but we'll take that ride with you." So I'm very honored to have you as one of our Founders Club content partners. So my first question is, how was it that you became the first female officer at Chick-fil-A? I know that Jeanette, Truett, Jimmy, maybe even Dan had to be in alignment. So what was the story behind that, and how'd that all unfold for you?
Bill, before I answer that, I do have to say thank you so much for having me today and for the work that you're doing with CEO Zones and providing that great content to people so that they can learn more about how to strengthen their leadership. And I really appreciate your having me. Now, to answer that question of how that happened, I called myself the accidental vice president because I actually found a calling that I loved in the work that I was doing at Chick-fil-A. I started out with a brief marketing background. You said I spent most of my life at Chick-fil-A, and that's true. All of my adult life up until 6 years ago was at Chick-fil-A, and I had worked a little while in the advertising business, and I was trying to get a job in marketing at Chick-fil-A and had no idea that HR would end up being my calling. But when I was selected for a role in human resources instead of that job in marketing, I soon found that my calling was to help other people find their calling. And that just resonated so much with me that I loved getting up, going to work every morning, and I enjoyed so much the work that I was doing that I was just barreling along, working really hard, trying to meet the expectations, particularly of Jimmy Collins. Jimmy was the president of Chick-fil-A at that time, and he had learned from Truett how to select talent. Without a doubt, the biggest mentor and champion I had at Chick-fil-A was Jimmy Collins. And so Jimmy had a lot of expectations around how talent was selected that, of course, he learned from Truett. Truett said, we're not in the restaurant business, we're in the people business. And he had high expectations. He knew that if we selected the right people and that we grew those people, that Chick-fil-A would be successful. Of course, he was right. And the person who really carried that mantle for him was Jimmy Collins. And so Jimmy took me under his wing from very early in my Chick-fil-A career and provided me so many opportunities. Now, he was hard on me. He held me accountable, but it really paid off in the end. And so I just worked hard and grew in my career and learned as much as I could and listened to the advice of leadership. And one day, Jimmy called me into his office and he let me know that I was going to be promoted to vice president, and I was as surprised as anyone, but very, very thankful for that opportunity to lead that part of the organization. It's kind of a funny story around that. I worked my way through the HR department doing just about every job that was in that function, and in the fall of 1998, my boss, Huey Woods, had announced that he was retiring. He was then the vice president of human resources, and he was going to retire. And it was known that I was going to replace him. And but I found out that I was expecting my third son, and so I didn't tell anybody for the longest time because Huey was retiring in June, and this baby was to be born in June. And I knew that was going to upset the apple cart a little bit. But, you know, another thing that I'm really grateful for is Huey stepped up and he said, okay, I'll stay for 3 more months so you can go on maternity leave. And he did. And within 2 weeks after I got back, Huey was gone. And I had a new baby and a new role. And I tell you what, my hands were full.
Yeah, and Huey was another good friend. Still remember his turtlenex. I assume you wore turtlenecks after that. That would have been in the late 70s, early 80s when I knew he was the best. So the next thing on my mind was the book that came out, It's My Pleasure. What an honor it had to be. And Dee Ann Turner, who is now, I guess, the chairman of Chick-fil-A. He was then the CEO president. But Dan and I are the same age. We did a few things together in our youth. But in any event, for him to write in there that you're the first person that's allowed to publicly talk about how do we do things at Chick-fil-A, what's the Chick-fil-A culture, how do we hire and select, that had to be quite the honor. I just, my hat's off to you. When I read that in the book back when the book first came out, I thought, wow, because that was something... that is a secret sauce, and now it's out in the public, so for the first time.
Yeah, it was quite an honor for him to entrust me to be able to do that. That book, people called, and I called it my love letter to Chick-fil-A. Truett had passed away the year before that book was published, and it was really, I just poured my heart out. It was the fastest of the 3 books that I wrote. I wrote it all on vacation, and I found myself, it was a little bit of tears and a little bit of laughter and the memories of all of that, but just really pouring out what had happened in my early years, and of course you were earlier than that, Bill, but how we put that culture together and took Truett's vision and strengthened that and grew it over time. And so it was a great privilege and honor to be able to write that book.
It's a great book, and I did mark it up at the time. I have a second copy that I lend out. It's kind of like my lending library. But this copy was my work copy that I carried to work. And in Chapter 2, for anybody that would ever want to be hired at CEO Zones, all you have to do is pick up Chapter 2, How Dee Ann Selected Talent at Chick-fil-A. All the questions are there so you can prepare for the test, which kind of takes me to, on your website, deeannturner.com, your updated list of your top 25 questions to select extraordinary talent is there. So we kind of have the 10-year-old questions and the new questions, and I found that interesting as I was doing my homework to talk to you today.
Let me tell you a little bit about that, Bill, and how all that came about. So it's interesting because It's My Pleasure was my first book, and that publisher went out of business. And so I obtained the rights back for the book and sold them to Baker Publishing. And Baker took that book and they said, okay, well, we want you to rewrite it, we want you to add content, and we want a new title. Now, I'll say that I didn't necessarily agree with that because It's My Pleasure really... it was who Chick-fil-A was. But we did, and it became Bet on Talent, How to Create a Remarkable Culture that Wins the Hearts of Customers. So that book is a rewrite of It's My Pleasure, but it's a better version. And that's one thing I'm really grateful for Baker, because they created a better version of the book. And so you can't find It's My Pleasure anymore, so you better hold on to those 2 copies.
Well, there was one yesterday at eBay, and I ordered it again, and guess how much I paid for this book yesterday? A brand new one. It's not here yet. I have my copy, my lender copy, and I found one more. Guess how much I had to pay?
Well, I would hope that it was only a few dollars, but based on what I've seen, it was a few more than that.
$57 plus postage and handling, but it said it was brand new, never been read, and I said, ship it to me.
Well, yeah.
So back in chapter 2 of this book, and or the concept. Let's move away from that book, maybe, since you summed that up so well, and move forward. I'm older than you. I have a great-grandson, so I'm the old guy. The 3 C's. Even last week at High Point University, I noticed a press release where you're still teaching students at High Point. So 2 things here that I'd like to cover. High Point University, everybody that I meet that's working with them, I'll say that we're professionals and are there. I don't know any of their full-time staff, but people in residence. So Mark Sanborn, yourself, are just top-tier people in your space, have the best pedigree, track records, and how is High Point attracting that talent and the vision of really giving, I'll say students, I almost said kids, giving students those life skills to just be some of the best that's going to come in the next 10 years. How did all that come together, or who's behind it maybe?
Well, Dr. Cobain, the president of High Point, is definitely behind it. And, you know, the whole story of High Point is fascinating. And I don't know if you've had a chance to read his new book yet, Transformational Culture. But I would put that on the list because you're such a fan and it tells the whole story. But just briefly, when he took over in 2005, one of the things he wanted to do and to take that job was run it as a business, because he was a businessman, instead of an academic institution. And that made all the difference. And so he focused on the students and their families actually being the customers instead of faculty, although he treats the faculty very well, but he understands who the customer is, who writes the check. And so he works very hard to serve those families in various ways. And one of this is using his business contacts and his own charm and charisma too, to bring people in. And it started with Steve Wozniak from Apple Computer. He was the first innovator in residence for Dr. Cobain. And I mean, it's amazing just to be there and watch those students have an opportunity to interact with somebody like Woz. And, you know, and for Dr. Cobain to be able to talk to parents when they're trying to make a decision, well, these are the kinds of people that your students can rub shoulders with. Brilliant on his part, because it's a win-win. It's a win for the students because they do get access. It's called Access to Innovators, and they really do get access one-on-one, group time. And it's a win for people like me as one of the innovators because it keeps me energized. It keeps my pulse right on what's going on in the marketplace with careers, how things are changing for people as they're entering the marketplace. And so it's turned out to be a really great thing to attract students when now there's, I think, 30 or more of these innovators. And again, Centon Marshall, you know, from the Dallas Mavericks. I could just go down the list. Dean Cain, he played Superman, if you remember. And just different people that are fulfilling these roles in all kinds of disciplines, from medical to, actors, you name it, artists in residence, all kinds of things that the students have an opportunity to be exposed to. And so I think it was brilliant on the part of Dr. Cobain.
Just everything I read and see and the people I do know, it seems to be, if I had children going to college, I think I would do that, make the trip. So my extremely long run-on question set there, the 3 C's, would you mind giving us a little quick training about character, competency, and chemistry?
Absolutely. Well, when I select talent, I focus on the 3 C's, character, competency, and chemistry. And I always start with character. You can teach people to do a lot of things. In our business, it was you could teach them to make a Chick-fil-A sandwich. But it was a whole lot harder to take somebody who might be dishonest or lacking integrity and grow their character. And so I like to start with character first. And when I talk about character, I'm talking about character that matches the organization. So I'm looking for somebody whose personal purpose, mission, and values align with that of the organization. The second thing I look for is competency. We all know what competency is, right? It's the ability to do the job you need to get done. And so I want to focus on, when I'm talking about competency, one of the things I like to do, you mentioned those questions on my website, I like to ask behavioral-based questions that talk about somebody's past performance, because we know that past performance is the best predictor of future performance. So I want to ask questions about, tell me about a time when. Describe for me a situation you were in where you made this decision. And then when I talk about competency, I want to go 3 questions deep. And what do I mean by that? Well, I want to, if I ask, tell me about the most difficult project you worked on. So they tell me about that. Well, tell me about the outcome of that project. They tell me, what kind of feedback did you get from the customer or from your boss? And I've turned a simple question now into a 10-minute conversation that gives me a lot of information about the competency of this candidate. And of course, the other thing I want to do is I want to check their references. And when I talk to their references, I want to ask them the same questions. I want to ask the same type of behavioral questions so I get stories and examples from the references. And then so I want competency that matches the role. And then the last thing is I want chemistry that matches the team. And when I talk about chemistry, I'm not talking about us locking arms and singing Kumbaya. When I talk about chemistry, I'm talking about people who have a skill set that they can bring a different perspective onto the team, and that their collaboration skill is so strong that they can influence the outcome and the decisions of the team. That's great chemistry within a team when you have a bunch of people that can do that. So when I'm focusing on selecting talent, I'm looking at 3 things. Character that matches the organization, competency that matches the role, and chemistry that matches the team.
Thank you. And that, I believe, is a thread throughout all your books, if I got that correct. But so now I want to remind us that we're making this video, Meet the Speaker series, for CEOs to hire you. We're making that so that they might buy your books for their whole organization. But it looks like you have some core competencies around very specific keynotes that you like to give. And again, these are on your website, deeannturner.com. But the recipe for a remarkable culture. Could you unpack that real quick? Kind of give yourself a commercial. I know that's very hard for you to do, but feel free to do that.
When I talk about the recipe for a remarkable culture, I'm trying to help an organization and really inspire them to create something that's sustainable over a long period of time, just exactly what we did at Chick-fil-A. And when I talk about culture, I'm not talking about activities. I'm not talking about bring your dog to work day or, what the dress code is or those types of things. Those might be behaviors or results of your culture, but I'm talking about the very essence. And I have 3 elements that I think make up the culture. Number 1 is a meaningful purpose. The big why you exist at all. It's the why that drives people. That's why they show up for work. That's why they want to be a part of your organization and stay engaged. So do you have a big why, a reason for existing? And then the second thing that I believe makes up a remarkable culture is a challenging mission. If you're going to select extraordinary talent, that talent wants a big goal, something that's bigger than themselves that they can sink their teeth into and really go after. And the third thing that I look for is or that I want to develop within an organization is demonstrated core values. And you notice there I said demonstrated, because if they're just on a screensaver or up on a wall in a conference room, they're not very actionable. But core values that are demonstrated from leaders throughout the organization are a strong set of values that really talk about what the organization believes in and how they're going to treat other people within the organization and their customers. So those are the 3 elements that I really look for when I'm helping an organization develop their culture.
All right, so Dee Ann, one of your other topics that you do keynotes is the 3 truths about the world of work. What would unpack that for us? What would that deliver to an organization through your speaking?
I love having this discussion, and a lot of times this is a talk that I give at an organization to their emerging talent. So let me back up for just a minute and explain to you a little bit how my content works together. So I wrote this book, Bet on Talent, which is all about teaching organizations and their leaders how to find and keep extraordinary talent. And then I wrote Crush Your Career, which is the flip side of the same coin that teaches talent how to be extraordinary. So I love this message because it's really based on my content from Crush Your Career, and it's helping that young talent with the things, the unwritten rules, the things that they need to know. And so I talk about the importance of being able to navigate landmines and the fact that some you see coming and some you don't see coming. I talk about the whole principle of needing to develop relationships, especially to create advocacy. One of the things I love is I start out with this statement that I tell them. All the most important decisions about your career are made when you're not in the room. And if you stop and think about that, it's really sobering. You know, when you're selected, you're not in the room. When you're promoted, when they make that decision, you're not in the room. How much they compensate you, you're not in the room. When they decide you're done, you're not in the room. So if you're not in the room, the implication's clear. You need to have a relationship with somebody who is in the room. You know, for me, that was Jimmy Collins. That's what Jimmy did for me. And then the third thing that I like to talk about is the importance of developing yourself. Some of these people will go into jobs where the company will do that for them. They'll provide all the opportunities. Chick-fil-A is such an organization. I mean, the opportunities, you almost couldn't take advantage of everything that was offered to you. And if you're fortunate enough for that to happen for you, then absolutely get involved in everything you can and learn all that you can. But you know what? Some people will go to an organization and they won't invest in their employees. And if you're in that situation, then you've got to make the effort to invest in yourself, whether it's taking your own time to go to those conferences, or the books that you read, or the podcasts that you listen to, or the videos that you watch on YouTube, or the going home at night and taking an online course to upskill. Any of those things to invest in yourself. So that's what I teach. I both teach that at the college level, but I also teach that to emerging leaders within organizations. And my style is to tell a lot of stories, so I tell a lot of my own experiences and the experiences of others to help drive those points home.
Well, clearly you're a great storyteller, so I appreciate that about you as well. I'm not sure if it's your slogan, your mantra, but on your website it says the greatest responsibility of leaders is to steward well the talent entrusted to them, which kind of reminded me of Chick-fil-A and being a good steward. But how are you applying that? What can we learn from you on being a good steward to the talent that's entrusted to us?
Well, one of the things that I really, and of course I learned that at Chick-fil-A, that came from Truett Cathy himself. And it came out of the corporate purpose, and that part of the corporate purpose that says to be a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us. Well, sometimes when people think about stewardship, they just think about the treasure part, the money, but they don't think about the time and the talent part. And so for any organization, this is and I don't like the word asset, but your greatest resource. The competitive advantage that you have, I believe, is in your people. Your people are the ones who touch the customer. They're the ones that engage the culture of the organization. And so that's the most important part of stewardship, in my opinion, is the talent. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, it's recognizing how important they are and that they're not dispensable, as so many organizations often treat people, but that invest in them, grow them, mentor them, communicate with them, all those leadership skills that you need in order to be sure that you keep your talent on your team. You've invested a lot to select them, and so if you don't steward them well, then they're gonna be gone. And so that stewardship part and taking a mindset of this is a valuable resource to me, and I've been entrusted with this is somebody's life. Now, I used to when I talk to leaders about this, I had a life-changing moment as a leader when I became a mom. I wasn't very good at giving grace before then. Then you become a parent and you learn a lot about that concept. And so I became a much better leader. And the reason I became a better leader is because all of a sudden, every person I interacted with, I realized that was somebody's husband or wife. That was somebody's son or daughter, mom or dad, brother or sister. That individual was important to somebody. And so when I started treating them like that important somebody in my life, it totally changed my leadership style and the way that I stewarded my own talent at Chick-fil-A.
That reminded me, one time Truett and I were somewhere, I don't remember where we were, but he made the mental note. He burnt it into my little head that we're not just maybe 40 part-time employees. We're impacting thousands of families at each and every Chick-fil-A store. So that's why we need to do that. And just it made an impression on me because I was still full-time in the Air Force while I spent my weekends with Truett at a mall near you back in the early days. But in any event, so here could be a little bit of a tricky question. I promise no tricky questions, but this one, some people just, I'm surprised they think it's tricky. What keeps you motivated today and going forward?
What keeps me motivated and going forward? I mean, I just had that experience last week on the campus of High Point. I get with those young people, and a lot of times people are gloom and doom about our world circumstances, and that's not to say we're not without plenty of challenges right now. But the one thing I believe in, and this comes from my own adult sons and raising them and coaching them on a weekly basis now, and then these young people that I work with at High Point, what I realize is that they were made for this season. We were made for our season, for our chapter in this world. They're prepared for their season, and they'll be okay. And so I get so refreshed and motivated and recognize, and what I love about them is, especially is, you think that I've said it all, I've talked about it all, they've heard it all, how could I offer anything new? But then I realize they haven't heard it all. And so when I go and I offer something and they receive it and it helps them, that's just super motivating to me to keep at it, because there's a whole new generation that needs the wisdom and all that we have to offer from what we learned coming along.
Okay. I saw you pause, but that was good. Mark Sanborn, our mutual friend, he had a moment over that question. He had to think about that one. It was fun. So in any event, you mentioned a couple times, I've mentioned a couple times, Crush Your Career. I believe it's your newest book that came out. I think that's still the most current this past summer. But chapter one's title, I always take a book and I look at the back, and I don't know why. I think it was Jimmy Collins one time said, Bill, here's how, and he always read history books, right, when we would be out traveling together. And he'd look at the back cover, he'd look inside the back cover, and then he'd look at the last chapter to decide, was he going to invest his time in reading the whole book? So in any event, your first chapter, Prepare Your Character, I didn't know what to expect. It made total sense when I read your chapter, but that title kind of shook me a bit. How did you come up with the title, and could you unpack for us what chapter one of Crushing Your Career is about?
Sure. Well, if you remember what I said a little bit earlier about this flip side of the same coin. So in Bet on Talent, I talked about how you create that remarkable culture, and I talked about purpose and mission and core values, and then I talked about how to select extraordinary talent to execute that culture, and then a great bit about the customer experience, about how taking those two things, culture and extraordinary talent, to win the hearts of your customers and create great and amazing customer experiences. So that's what Crush Your Career was. It was the flip side. It was, okay, now I have to teach this talent how to be prepared to do those things themselves. How do I go get a job with an organization like Chick-fil-A that believes these things? And so it was the reverse. It was like, well, if I select first based on character, then you have to prepare your character. And as you get ready for your career, and we see this all the time, right? We see people who are extraordinarily successful and then have character failures and lose it all. And so that was my lesson in that first chapter, was start with your character. And if it was a mom or dad reading my book or giving this book to a young person, how important it is that you start very young in developing character and deciding, what are your core values? What is your purpose in life? What big mission are you trying to accomplish? Because I think that individual who brings that to the table, an organization is attracted to that. And so I want that individual to have their character prepared. I like to say that in an organization, the culture is made up of the sum total of the character of the people in the organization. So that's why it's so important, first, that you select for character. And if you're that person that's going to be a part of a culture, then prepare your character to add and contribute to that culture, not take away from it.
Thank you. Another interesting thing, if you've seen any of my other podcasts with our other content partners, Mark Madison, at the end of every chapter, he kind of redid, here's what I hope you got from this chapter. And your approach was a little bit more unique, maybe modern, where it says, what's your story? How'd you come up with that? How'd that idea come about, and what was there for you to make it there?
Well, one of the things that when candidates are preparing to go into a job search, one of the things that I really want them to know, I always say there's two things you need to know, and this is not rocket science, but it's know yourself and know the organization. So what do I mean by know yourself? Well, I want them to reflect, what are your stories? What are your examples you're going to talk about in an interview? And get that idea of reflection so that they think it first in their own mind, and then they're prepared to deliver it in whatever setting. So if it's an interview setting, they've thought about the examples of their past performance that they want to share. And they have those stories in their mind as they go in their interview. If they're going into their first leadership assignment, which I talk about in Crush Your Career, I want them to reflect on the experiences they've had with other leaders that's helping them develop the story of the leader that they'll be. But that was the whole idea behind it, is you're creating your story as you go through this. What are you going, so create those reflections and in your mind so that you know what your story is. And that's a story you can share as you grow in your career, as you move into leadership positions, and give back to other people who are trying to do the same.
Excellent. So DeeAnnTurner.com is where we can book a speaking engagement, buy your books, keep up to date on what's happening at High Point University. It looks like you do a couple things there back and forth. But as we bring this to close, with the CEOs and owners that are watching and listening, Dee Ann's more than just a speaker, more than just an author. She's a mentor, a coach, and I like her as a down-to-earth storyteller. So I would really invite you to go to DeeAnnTurner.com, hire her. She is available some of the time, not often, so she's selective there. But and enjoy. I forgot to ask you as we come to a close. You're in your brand new home. How far are you from the university, or how often do you go to High Point University? I forgot to ask that.
Well, we'll tell you, Bill, I'm not yet. Today I'm in my current house. We're not in our brand.
Oh.
We're nomads right now.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We're trying to pack this one up. In fact, in the background, my husband is loading things up because we're headed to the other place this afternoon, and but we still have workers in there working, so forth. But in my new home, we will be 2.5 hours closer to High Point, so I'm excited that I'm going to be there. And probably flying more out of Greenville, South Carolina versus Atlanta. But looking forward to being in that community. But I'm looking forward to, one of the things is, in our new home, I have a really special place for writing and thinking and creating, and I've set that up for that very purpose so that I can just continue producing content. I'm real particular with that. You might find I don't post every day. Sometimes I don't post every week because I want whatever I bring to be value, and not so much how often can I put something out there in front of people, but that when I do put it, that they'll pause and they'll read it or they'll watch it because they feel like it's really offering and adding value and a contribution to what they're learning.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you as our guest today.
Well, it's been my complete pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.